Name is Jake, I'm 37 years old. I always thought that family is a refuge, a fortress where you feel protected and loved. But in recent years, I've realized that I've become a prisoner of my own illusions. My wife, Celine, who once seemed like a bright light in my life, has become a shadow that has swallowed me whole. At the beginning of our story, Celine was like fireworks. We were young, enthusiastic and full of plans. Her every laugh was like a spark igniting a fire in my heart. Together we dreamed, made big plans and sought adventure at every turn. But time inexorably took away a piece of our happiness, and 5 years later, I found myself living with a stranger. Celine stopped looking at me as a husband. I became her neighbor, a necessary comfort. Every night I sat on the couch trying to get her to talk. Flipping through magazines, engaging in hobbies, practically begging for attention. But each time, her indifference cut like a knife. I missed the times when our hands intertwined and our gazes spoke volumes without words. Now she could look at me with emptiness in her eyes, as if I were just a decoration in her life. That ill-fated evening, as I gathered my courage to bring up our problem, she uttered words that came as a blow to me. "I don't owe you anything." I couldn't believe my ears, and though I wasn't ready to admit it, the thought lingered inside me. Am I not living with a dear neighbor? I no longer wanted to wake up next to someone who didn't care about my feelings. I felt desperately alone amidst her indifference. With each passing year, I tried to recapture the passion that had once bound us together. Romantic dinners, weekends together, traveling. Celine responded to it all with a cold smile, which was enough to break my heart. Even when I suggested seeing a therapist, she laughed as if I'd suggested doing something stupid. "Therapy won't help," she said, like it was obvious. I didn't know what to say. She was only right about one thing. These things don't get solved when one doesn't want to change. With each failed attempt, I went deeper and deeper into myself. I started exercising, started talking to old friends, and returned to my hobby, woodworking. It became the only place where I could freely express my emotions. Every chip, every roughness of the wood became a physical embodiment of my unrealized feelings. One day I came home earlier than usual and entered the room, expecting to see her, as usual, with a booker in front of the TV. But instead I found her engrossed in the screen of her phone. Her attention was focused on the messages, and I noticed her scrolling rapidly through the screen, her face reflecting years of excitement. My heart raced, anxiety building in my chest. I hesitated to disturb the scene, but everything inside me was screaming that something was wrong. I watched as she searched for phrases that weren't addressed to me, dialoguing with someone who seemed to be much closer to her than I was. A sense of betrayal swept over me. Was I really living with a woman who had a secret life? I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How deceptive outward displays of love can be when they hide their own secrets and lies. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just indifference. I was facing a reality that was far more painful than I had realized. I was no longer focused on creating a cozy atmosphere, on trying to regain what we had lost. I was going to free myself from these lies, from this life that made no sense. I went out into the other room and began to think through my actions. I wasn't going to stay in this confusing Carson any longer. I called a lawyer to finalize the divorce. This decision came to me like thunder, and the faster I acted, the faster I got out of this gaping rift between us. The day that followed was the last day in this house I had once considered my own. I took all my belongings and left it feeling like I was shedding heavy armor. Celine stayed behind and I stepped towards a new beginning. Each step of freedom was full of hope and the desire to start a new life. I was ready to discover a world outside these walls, a world that could once again be filled with emotion, sincerity, and freedom. As I gathered my things and felt the cold air rush through my soul, Celine looked confused, not realizing what she was losing. I saw the realization flicker in her eyes. She stepped closer, but before she could say a word, I was out the door without turning around. The first few days at the hotel weren't easy. I was getting used to being alone, and the desire to go home again to a familiar life was depressing. On the outside my world looked the same as it had before, but on the inside I could feel my old shackles being pulled away. I changed all my passwords and accesses, instinctively shutting myself off from anything that reminded me of what had happened. With each successive night, Celine never gave up trying to get me back. She sent me texts apologizing and promising me that things would change. I didn't respond to anything and just lay on the hard hotel bed, setting myself up for my own rebellion. One day, at the worst possible moment, I received a video of her in black lace lingerie, leaning into the camera lens to carefully remove the thin straps, her eyes sparkling with desire. I was furious as I realized this was an attempt at provocation, an attempt to distract me from everything that had happened. It wasn't love, it was another hook to keep me from going too far. 2 days passed, and I noticed my heart beating more rhythmically and the emotional heaviness draining away. I remembered how we had once had parties and celebrations together, but now those memories were like rotten fruit, stinky and unusable. In those days, I developed a new habit, going to the gym. It became my own ritual, a way to blow off steam. Each exercise relieved me of old energy, all the pain that had been building up in my soul. Despite my new focus, Celine never stopped trying to get me back. Her messages became more and more insistent. I miss you. You're still my husband. It seemed like every word she said was with deliberate warmth, but underneath the pressure of emotion felt like cold steel. I could hardly believe she actually wanted a change, or if it was just dust on the glass she was trying to wipe off to hide her true face. I returned to society as if I had come out of hibernation. I started seeing friends, and they supported me through this difficult period. One day at a party, surrounded by laughter and noise, I met a girl who impressed me with her charisma. She was as independent as I was and didn't shy away from her freedom. Every word she spoke was warmth, a new light breaking through the cracks of my old life. But no matter how much the new energy pulled me, thoughts of Celine never left my mind. I couldn't ignore the fact that I still had unresolved feelings. Nevertheless, the new acquaintance was my outlet. I noticed that I was capable of new feelings, laughter, courage, and even a lightness that had long been foreign to me. Meanwhile, Celine continued her attempts to win me back, but now they tended toward the extreme. Each week I received new messages where she made excuses, promising to give up her old habits. She even took warm pictures, attempts to bring me back into their world through appearances, which had never been the most important thing. But now I realized I didn't want to go back to the empty, lifeless house where there was nothing but falsity between us. I continued to meet new people, discovering the joy I hadn't noticed before. Each new friendship reminded me, my life wasn't over, it was just beginning to change. Finally, after 2 weeks of Celine's tedious attempts to get our vine organized again, I decided it was time to end this challenging phase. I was ready for the ultimate breakup. A real ending where there would be no reticence. I miss you, she wrote, backing up her words with images in lacy lingerie that seemed meant to remind me of what we had. Sighs full of passion could be heard in her voicemails. I want to come over with a bottle of wine, let's fix this. But what was there to fix in the void? I couldn't believe her words, her promises, when all along I had seen her true face. Nevertheless, the memory of the old happiness continued to torment me. I realized that I needed to put a bold end to this story, but how could I do that when my heart still clenched with pain? Every night coming back from work, I looked for reasons to forget, to switch. Parties with friends became my life straw. I put my sadness to sleep as best I could and raised my glasses, looking into the eyes of new acquaintances who were trying to pull me out of the shadows. The night everything changed, I showed up at the bar with my friends. The atmosphere was lively and I tried to engage in conversation, but involuntarily thought of Celine. After a few beers, my gaze wandered around the room until it stopped on a couple in the corner at a table. And then my heart fluttered as I realized who this woman was sitting with, my wife. She was in the arms of another man, and their passion was so obvious that the world seemed to cease to exist. I watched as they kissed passionately, as if oblivious to everything around them. Her every movement was full of desire, and the look she was giving this strange man was filled with such lust that it was hard to believe that just a couple hours ago she was texting me about love and regret. So was it love? Flashed through my head like a bolt of lightning. That question, like a perforation on old paper, pierced through my consciousness with fury. I wanted to fall to my knees at the realization that my feelings were a deception and her promises were just air. She seemed ready to devour him, as if her whole being represented only one thing: attraction to this moment, to this man. The emotions that had once raged in our lives now looked pathetic and contrived against the backdrop of their passion. I felt the power she had over me disappear. Every moment of anger and pain experienced in the past spilled out of me. It wasn't suffering, it was a liberating anger that filled me with power. I pressed a button in my mind, not like a switch, but like dynamite. I realized that everything we once had was only an illusion, a mask. Gathering all my resolve, I rose from my seat and walked out of the bar, leaving behind me an old life that could never be restored. I knew that every moment of fear I had felt had come to an end. I wasn't going back to Celine, to the tales of love and change that were just words in the darkness. I waited for the sun as I stepped out into the fresh air. The world seemed brighter and there were horizons of new possibilities again. Every moment experienced was smoothly transcending the old life. Despite all the pain, hope blossomed in my heart. I was ready to start anew, and this time only on my own terms. The past was left behind, giving room for the new, bigger and present. With every step I felt myself growing stronger and freer. There was a new life ahead of me, and now only I could decide what my path would be.